Your Bibles, your phone, and I hope you do. I want you to turn open with me to the book of Joshua. Joshua, sixth book in your Bible. Look in the table of contents. You can find it that way as well. It has been a handful of weeks since we have been in the book of Joshua, and so I feel like I need to catch us up, man, just a little bit, because maybe you've forgotten all about this book of Joshua. And so Joshua is an exciting book because it is that book where there's like a little bit of a change in leadership from Moses, who has been the leader for the last 40 years. And so finally, they're actually going to be able to move into the promised land, which is what God had promised all the way back to Abraham. And so there's a whole lot. And so in chapter 1, we kind of read about this transition of leadership from Moses to Joshua. And then in chapter 2, we kind of read about this story of Rahab and how Rahab was going to help the people kind of get into the promised land, and how she played this incredible role. And so in chapter 3, we're finally going to see the people get to cross the Jordan River, which is amazing. And so one of the phrases that I find myself kind of thinking over and over as I kind of was reading through Joshua chapter 3 all week is kind of this phrase of like better late than never. Right? Like, I don't know if you've ever been there, but have you ever like been waiting for something, you've been wanting something, like it's just been on the radar, like maybe it's just been something and like you're like, man, better late than never. But here's the thing, oftentimes when we say that phrase, better late than never, we're usually like, man, it's been a week. Whew, that waiting game, that was tough, man, that week, or man, maybe that month was tough. Imagine that you have been this people, man, waiting for 400 years, and it's like, finally, we're gonna get to enter into the promised land. So remember, 400 years earlier, the promise was made to Abraham. 40 years ago, Moses led the people out of Egypt. They finally got to cross the Red Sea as the Egyptians were bearing down on them. They spent 1 year at Mount Sinai receiving the words, receiving the law, the 10 commandments. And then as we come into Joshua, man, or a little bit earlier, like they sent the 12 spies, he sent the 2 spies, and it's like finally we're here on the precipice of finally being able to cross. Better late than never. So I hope you're there by now. So Joshua chapter 3 is where we're gonna start this morning. And this is what it says. It says, Joshua started early in the next morning and left the acacia grove with all the Israelites. They went as far as the Jordan and stayed there before crossing. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God carried by the Levitical priest, you're to break camp, you're to follow it. And keep your distance about 1,000 yards between yourself and the ark. Don't go near it so that you can see the way to go, for you haven't traveled this way before. All right, pause. Before we jump in, I need you to understand a little bit of this idea of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, depending on your background in church, background in Bible, when you hear the word Ark, you might think of a couple different things. You could think in your mind, you might be thinking like Noah's Ark. Now, we're not talking about a big boat here, so I need you to kind of get that one out of your mind. The other one, like, and this might be like dating myself, but some of you might understand, like Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, like the Lost Ark, like it's like they're trying to go, that's the ark, they're trying to find the ark. And just in case you're like, what in the world is this ark thing? Like what in the world are we talking about? Back in Exodus chapter 25, we get a little bit of a description of the ark. And so I want to read it for us just so we know exactly what this ark is. So this is Exodus 25. He says this. He says that they are to make an ark of acacia wood, 45 inches long, 27 inches wide, 27 inches high, overlay it with pure gold, overlay it both inside and out, also make a gold molding all around it. Cast 4 gold rings for it and place them on its 4 feet. 2 rings on one side, 2 rings on the other side. Make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Then insert the poles into the rings on the side of the ark in order to carry the ark with them. The poles are to remain in the rings of the ark. They must not be removed from it. Put the tablets of the testimony that I will give you into the ark. Make a mercy seat of pure gold, 45 inches long, 27 inches wide. So giving you just a little description of what the people were to make, like this ark here. Now, and if you're thinking to yourself like, okay, great, you described it. Let me just share maybe the most important thing that I need you to understand about the ark as we talk about it today. The ark represented the presence of God in the midst of his people. If there's nothing else you remember about the ark, you don't remember anything about how long it was, how big it was, any of that, I need you to remember the ark represented the presence of God in the midst of his people. Inside the ark, it contained 2 tablets of stone, the 10 Commandments, a jar of manna, and Aaron's staff. Now that was to symbolize 3 different things that was inside. It was to symbolize God's proclamation, his given word. It was to symbolize God's provision. It was also to symbolize God's power. So they were great. That's the ark. And as they are getting ready to cross, the people are told to do 2 distinct things. Keep your eyes on the ark, keep your distance from the ark. All right, let's look at them one by one, right? Keep your eyes on the ark. Our eyes have the ability to let in lots of different things. We use them not just to see, like as I'm looking out at you right now, but we also use our eyes it helps us understand the world around us. Like so often, like that, it's what we use. Like it helps us form ideas, it helps us form thoughts, it helps us form our worldviews. Like what we see matters. In fact, the scripture is full of verses that talk about what we see. I just pulled 4 from us. Matthew chapter 6, verse 22, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Proverbs 101, I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. Psalm 119, open my eyes and I may see the wonderful things in your law. Job 31, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look at a woman lustfully. And on and on and on I could go about what the scripture talks about, what we let into through our eyes, what we see actually matters. Joshua wanted to make sure that the people kept their eyes on the ark, on the presence of God, because he knows that when things are scary, when things are unknown, when the journey that we're about to embark on is to an area that we just don't know or understand, the temptation is to focus our eyes on things that are familiar to us. The temptation when we go into areas, even in your life, like the temptation for us is when you embark on a new journey. Maybe you move to a new city, maybe you start a new job, maybe you're starting university for the first time, maybe you're changing grades from 6th grade to 7th or 7th to 8th or whatever it might be. The temptation is in those new phases of life, we return to what is familiar to us, even when what is familiar to us isn't of the Lord. And so Joshua just want focus on. So my first question, I have multiple questions for us this morning. The first question that I have for us is, what are your eyes focused on? What are your eyes focused on? Like, what do you find yourself looking at? What do you find yourself staring at? So not only do we want to keep our eyes on the ark, the second thing that he says is keep your distance from the ark. Now, we have a tendency in our culture today, I want to say to show, we lack this sense of respect, but I don't even think it's a sense of respect. I just think we have a tendency in our culture today to make everything like buddy-buddy. Even okay, maybe I can give you an example to help explain what I'm thinking of. Axel, who was up here leading us in worship, is on our team, and Axel is, I hate to say it, but he's 20 plus years younger than me. He's like a kid, because I'm not that old. And so he's a kid. So he's 20 plus years. Now, and just FYI, I told him that I was going to share this story. So if you're I ran it by him. I didn't ask him. I was I'm going to tell it, but he knows. So anytime Axel greets me, almost every time, the phrase that he uses when he greets me is this. He always says to me, "What's up, old man?" Over and over and over, to which I usually respond with, "You don't want to get paid this month, do you?" But that's beside the point. He always responds, "What's up, old man?" Guess what he says to me over and over and over again. Now, I'm gonna be real honest. It does not bother me one bit, because apart from singing and playing, I can still do everything better than Axel, so it's fine, right? That's totally fine. I'm totally fine. I mean, if he wants to go race after church, I will go race him after church and make him see I'm not as old as he thinks I am, right? So it really, honestly, we have a phenomenal relationship. So I just kind of laugh. But here's the thing, being really honest. When I was his age, this is just a cultural shift. When I was his age, if I ever said to somebody that's 20 years my elder, "What's up, old man?" not only would they take their belt off and beat me with it, But then when I got home and my dad heard that I said that to somebody 20 years my elder, he would then take his belt off and I would get that too, right? Like it's a culture thing, but in our culture today, like we just tend to have this like buddy type like mentality with so many people around us. But here's the point. I think we also take that line of thinking into our relationship with God. Like that Jesus is my homeboy, God is my homegirl. Like and in some respects, like in an effort to convey God's grace, God's mercy, God's kindness, God's love, God cares for you. And listen, all of those things are absolutely true. I don't want to minimize those 1 second. But in an effort to like elevate those, here's what I think we've done unintentionally. As we've elevated those, the holiness of God has lost value. It's lost its value. And so I think when he says, keep your distance from the ark, he's telling them that because he wants them to have a clear view, absolutely, but he also wants to remind them of the power, the might, the majesty, the holiness of God. And if there's an area in our culture today, an area in our walk with God that I think that we have seemingly lost just a little bit, it's the holiness of God. And so he says, what you look at matters, but also like you need to keep your distance. Because where we are going, you've never been there before. Right? He says, like, listen, part of it is like you need to understand the holiness of God. The other aspect is you don't know the way. And when we're not careful, you and I have a tendency to act like we know the way better than we really do. Anyone with kids who has ever taken them into any store in their entire life knows how this plays out, right? I remember when the boys were young, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, like we would walk into a store and there was something about, I don't know, kids have this, and parents, I know you're gonna agree with me. They have this innate, when you walk into a store and like if you let go, freedom, and like they just run wild. Man, they're just gonna go everywhere. So I used to play this game. You can judge me as a parent if you want to. I'm fine with that. I used to play this game where I would keep my eyes on the boys. Let me just phrase that real quick so you don't like call social services on me. But I would keep my eyes on my boys, but I would also, when they would take off, I would kind of like hide behind a pole and see how long it took them to notice daddy wasn't here and to have a freak out moment, right? Like all of a sudden they think, I know the way. I know exactly which way to go. And then they notice daddy's not there, mom's not there. And all of a sudden, when they start looking around and then they'll have like this panic attack. One time with Jude, I let it play on too long. I didn't like jump out and he was like, where are you? And I was like, sorry, I'm here. You know, I jumped out the pole, then it scared him. But it was like, you know this happens, right? He's telling him like, listen, you don't know the way. You may think you know the way, but you don't know the way. So keep your eyes on the ark. No one but the priest could go near the ark. God, as their ultimate leader, is going to show them the way. And then he continues and he says this, Joshua told the people, consecrate yourself because the Lord will do wonders among you tomorrow. And then he said to the priests, carry the ark of the covenant and go on ahead of the people. So they carried the ark of the covenant and went ahead of them. The Lord spoke to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you inside of all Israel so that they know that I will be with you just as I was with Moses. Command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant, and when you reach the edge of the water, stand in the Jordan. Okay, now first, let's talk about this phrase. Your translation may say a little different, but let's talk about this phrase, consecrate yourself. Like, listen, that's probably not a phrase that you use very often. Like, I'm gonna guess that not a single one of you has ever said, you know what, today, I'm gonna go consecrate myself. Like, I'm just gonna guess you don't use that type of language. Let me just explain it a little bit. It kind of like, here's some ways that you can understand it. It's a fancy way of saying like, set your mind right, cleanse yourself, separating oneself from things that are unclean, committing to living in service of God, like allowing God to work in your life, making a decision to go in a new direction. Here's why this is important. Here's why I feel like I wanna pause here and not run by this too quickly. I'm afraid many of us want God to move in our lives help us cross the metaphorical Jordan without any change to how we're actually living. I'm afraid that there are some of us who want God to move, but don't want to change a single thing about how we're living. God, like this, my job is just really difficult right now. I need you to help me out when it comes to my job. Like my coworkers are driving me nuts. My boss is driving me nuts. Like, and you go to God about it. And I want this, but you haven't actually spent time with him at all. It's like, God, I just want you to move. I want you to do this in my life. And yet we're not willing to make a change. I just wonder. Question 2 for us this morning. What might you need to cleanse yourself of? Like in your life right now, what might you need to consecrate yourself of so that God can actually move in your life? God, I want you to move, but I don't want to change a single thing about how I'm living. I want to continue doing what I want to do. And so if I can keep doing that and like you can move in the midst of my sinfulness and my disobedience, would love for you to do that. Did you notice the sequence of events, right? Consecrate yourself. That was the first thing he said. Consecrate yourself, and then the Lord's gonna do wonders. And then Joshua, you're gonna be exalted before the people. It wasn't Joshua, you're gonna be exalted. Then the Lord's gonna do wonders, and then consecrate. No. The sequence of events matters. And then he continues. Then Joshua told the Israelites in verse 9, he says, come closer and listen to the words of the Lord your God. He said that you will know that the living God is among you and that he will certainly dispossess before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites, when the ark of the covenant of the Lord of the whole earth goes before you into the Jordan. Now choose 12 men from the tribe of Israel, 1 man from each tribe, when the feet of the priest who carry the ark of the Lord of the whole earth comes to rest in the Jordan water, its waters will be cut off. The water flowing downstream will stand up in a mass. Now, let's make sure that we understand the key component of this text. Because the key component of this scene is not the priest, it's not their feet touching the edge of the water. The key of all of this is that the priests are holding the ark of the Lord. That's what he's trying to get across. You see, here's the truth. We might work, we might sing, we might minister, we might serve, but without the presence of God in our midst, without God in our lives, we will not see God's proclamation, provision, and power. We're simply just going through the motions. Like so many of us, we try to take matters into our own hands. Well, I've heard this, so I'm gonna do it. And God's like, no. The only way this is possible is because of my power. So here's question number 3. How many of us are simply going through the motions? Like you're not actually giving God the honor and glory that he deserves. You're not actually like resting and trusting in him. You're going, like, listen, I'm just gonna take things into my own hands. Like this is what I wanna do. This is how it's gonna happen. There would be enemies in the promised land, absolutely. 7 people to be exact. And he's trying to say to them, listen, if I can allow you to cross the Jordan River, don't you think these 7 people groups here, I can take care of them as well? And he says this, look at verse 14. He says, when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carried the ark of the covenant ahead of the people. Now the Jordan overflows its bank throughout the harvest season. But as soon as the priests carrying the ark reached the Jordan, their feet touched the water at its edge. And the water that was flowing downstream stood still, rising up in a mass that extended as far as Adam, a city to Zarethan. The water flowing into the Sea of Arabah, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off, and the people crossed opposite of Jericho. The priests carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan. I love this scene because God's like, listen, me helping you guys cross the Jordan, that's a miracle. But what we read is not, the Jordan isn't just like normal flow. Like it is when harvest season, meaning that the river is, massive. That the river, if you guys have ever like been in a river, like when we have a heavy rain here, like all of a sudden the river's like, they extends onto the banks, and it's like, crossing would be super, super, super dangerous. And God's like, listen, I'm not just gonna help you cross the Jordan River when it's like at normal, like I'm gonna help you cross the Jordan River whenever it is flood season. Like I just wanna show you just how big, just how mighty, just how magnificent I am. Why? So he can leave no doubt in their mind the miracle that has taken place. Because I don't know about you, but for me, so often in my life, I am notorious for trying to explain away things when it was clearly God. Like when God is clearly moving in my life, I like to think to myself, well, it was this sequence of events that led to this. And God's like, hello, I've been here the whole time. Are you kidding me? Like this happened at the resurrection of Jesus. People went, listen, he wasn't resurrected. The disciples, they just moved the body. Or this happened with Moses and the 10 plagues. Over and over. This whole idea for Joshua's telling us the waters at flood stage is to remind us just who God is and what he's done. But it's also a way of reminder to the Israelites, when you enter into that land, you know there's gonna be people. You know you have these tribes. You know the people are rather large. It's to remind the Israelites, God's in control. God's got this. God's not gonna let anything happen. So question 4 for us this morning, when you have a massive task in front of you, where do you put your trust? Is it in you? Is it in your abilities? The natural giftings that you have? Is it in God? See, in the New Testament, there was this guy named Peter who, if you know anything about Peter in the New Testament, like he was the guy who portrayed himself to like, I have all the answers. Like he was the guy that spoke first and then kind of went, oh, I need to put that back in my mouth. Like he's that kind of guy. On the night that Jesus was arrested, the disciples, they kind of fled and Peter kind of followed by at a distance. And on 3 different occasions, people come up to Peter and say, aren't you a follower of Jesus? And on 3 different times, the guy that had walked with Jesus for 3 years is like, I don't know the guy. I don't know the man. Thomas, history knows him as Doubting Thomas, one of the disciples of Jesus. We read this in the gospel. But Thomas, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples were telling him, we've seen the Lord. Thomas says to them, but if I don't see a mark of nails in his hands and put my finger into the mark of the nails and put my hand into his side, I will never believe. It's like he put more trust in himself than he ever had in what Jesus had told him about over and over and over again. And on and on and on I could go of men who have seen God move, women who have seen God move, but when push comes to shove, when a task comes, they start to have more confidence in themselves. So here's the last question I have for us. What is God doing in your life right now to show you who he is? That if we're not careful, instead of remembering and running to him, you explain it away. You say it's no big deal. You keep on living your life as if it doesn't matter. Like, I want you to think about how this could have gone for the Israelites. Like they've heard the stories of Egypt. They had heard the stories of how God had let the nation cross the Red Sea, that he had provided manna. Now he's stopping the Jordan River at flood stage, and they're gonna cross over. And if they do what I do sometimes, they're gonna cross over the Jordan River and they're gonna start carrying on with their normal lives, forgetting about God's provision. And I just wonder how many of us have seen God move in our lives multiple times, but we forget. Like life just happens, right? We get up the next day and we go to work and the kids still need to be taken care of and schoolwork still has to be done. And what happens when we're not focused on God, we're not keeping our eyes on him, is in those moments we just get back into our daily routine and we forget. We just forget over and over and over again. Don't explain things away. Don't forget what God has done. Don't just carry on as if nothing has happened. Here's the challenge for us. We want to live changed lives. So I don't know about you, but I don't want just normal. Like, I don't know how long God's gonna give me here. Like, right now we're at 42, and although Axel doesn't realize it, I'm in really good shape, And I'm hoping for another 42. And even at that 42, I'll still be able to beat him in a race. Like, I don't know how long God gives me, but here's what I know. I want every year that God gives me. I want every month that God gives me. I want every week, every day, every hour that God gives me to matter. Like, to not just live for myself, but to live for a kingdom that is not of my own. I don't just want to fall back into everyday life. I don't just want to go through the motions. I don't just want to, I'm just collecting a paycheck. No, I want to go all in. I want to live a changed life. In the same way that the people of God here cannot forget what he's done, you and I cannot forget what Jesus did for us. We can't. But it happens, right? You just going through life and you forget. You don't live as if he died on the cross for your sins. You don't live as if he paved a way for you to spend eternity with God. You forget. I don't want us to forget. Like, one of the reasons why I love gathering together on Sunday mornings is because it helps me remember. Like, I get to look out and I get to have conversations with you, and I hope that you get to have them with each other, and it helps me. Like, listen, Monday through Saturday would be much more difficult if I didn't get to spend Sunday with you. Gathering together with the saints isn't something I take for granted. It isn't something I forget. I mean, listen, this past month, man, I have been sick and I just can't seem to kick it. Maybe finally, knock on wood, somewhere that maybe I'm good. Like, missing a Sunday without you guys, I hate it. I don't want to forget. I want to remember. I want to remember what Jesus has done, that Jesus died in my place. And as I remember, I want it to change the way that I live. I want it to change the way you live. I don't just want you to go through the motions. I don't want you to not be able to have conversations about the hope that lives within you. I love this city, and I want this city to know that Jesus is King and that Jesus is Lord. And he has placed you right where he has you, not on accident, on purpose, to tell your neighbor, your coworker, and your friend. So one of my favorite lessons, if you want, from the people crossing over in the Jordan River, and we're gonna get to next week, and we're gonna get to Jericho, and one of my favorite lessons about Joshua chapter 3 is it reminds me not to forget what God has done in your life, in my life. Let's not just go through the motions. Let's be a people who remember, and that remember is change in our life.